The countdown to the highly anticipated inter-Korean summit between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in is underway. But are annual U.S. ROK joint military exercises provoking rather than promoting the peace process? And the Beijing Auto Show 2018 kicks into gear this week. How will China's new policies shift gears for the automobile market? Welcome to The Point. I'm Joe, sitting in for Liu Xin. The stage is set for the leaders of the two Koreas, Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un, to meet for their inter-Korean summit this Friday, the first in over 10 years. As the world prepares to watch, The Point will be taking an in-depth look at the unfolding events on the Korean Peninsula, where after months of diplomatic moves on both sides to diffuse tensions, relations between two Koreas appear to be warming. But the annual Feng Eagle Key Resolve military exercises, the world's largest war game between the U.S. and its ally, the ROK, still resumed on April the 1st. And this year's war game has been postponed and scaled back, but not canceled. Why not canceled? Is Kim's quiet response a sign of progress to come? Join me here for the discussions today, Sung-Yoon Lee, Koo-Korea Foundation Professor of Korean Studies at Fletcher School at Tufts University in Massachusetts, and Einar Tangen, our current affairs commentator here in Beijing. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen. Let me start with you, Mr. Song. The war game is an annual event, but this time around it was postponed because of the Winter Olympics in the ROK, and also it seems it is watered down in some way. Why?
Was that at me?
Yes, Mr. Song.
Was that a question for me?
Yes, Mr. Song.
Mr. Lee, yes, sorry, Lee, Xing Lee.
Mr. Lee,
well,
I'm
this
sorry.
is a small and reasonable concession, one might say. It's okay. One might say that postponing these annual combined military drills, that was a small, reasonable concession in view of the festive atmosphere surrounding the Winter Olympic Games held in the South. At the same time, these drills, exercises have been going on since 1976, and understandably, North Korea, without fail, complains each year. In the early 90s, in the wake of a temporary agreement between the U.S. and North Korea, the 1994 Geneva Accord, the U.S. and South Korea suspended these drills for 3 years, yet we know North Korea continued to march down the nuclear path, and we are where we are today. So I think this is another snapshot of small concessions being made by the U.S. and South Korea, and North Korea just forging ahead with its own agenda, which is to develop a credible nuclear capability.
And there's a reciprocal response from the North, because Pyongyang hasn't launched any missiles or tested any nuclear devices as of yet. So do you think this is a direct response to what is going on the Korean Peninsula, Mr. Lee?
Well, after that triumphant banner ballistic year that Kim Jong-un had in 2017, with 3 intercontinental ballistic missile tests and the most powerful nuclear test to date for the nation in September last year, it was time, I think, to change the tune from molto agitato to placido, to put on a kinder, gentler face. That is to dangle before the international community the possibility of denuclearization. Why would North Korea do that? Because continual provocations and escalations don't make any sense. You establish credibility with a crisis-like atmosphere that you've made, and then you return to negotiations and reach some concessions, for example, buy time and money with which to advance, perfect even, your own nuclear posture review. So I think all this is premeditated and entirely predictable. His father, Kim Jong-il, did exactly this in 2000. He visited China for the first time. Upon assuming power 6 years before, to discuss his upcoming summit meeting with the South Korean leader. Then Kim Jong-il sent an envoy to President Bill Clinton, invited President Clinton to Pyongyang, met with Putin the next year, invited the Japanese Prime Minister to Pyongyang in 2002. So we have seen this movie play out before several times already.
And are you agree this is premeditated, and how long Kim Jong-un has been planning for this kind of a rapprochement?
Well, I don't know if it is actually a rapprochement. I'm going to agree with my colleague in Seoul that this is something where he has carefully looked at what is possible, and I think he's outplaying Donald Trump at this point. I mean, no matter what happens, yes, he's created the crisis, egged on by Donald Trump, but he's the one who seems to be offering concessions. I mean, he says, I'm going to dismantle my nuclear testing facility. The truth is, it collapsed during the last exercise and is not used.
Why did he want to cancel or water down his ballistic and nuclear programs at this moment? Is it the sanctions?
No, it's not actually, because he's not watering down. All he's said is that I'm not going to fire off any rockets at this point. So he's put that on hold. He's indicated that he's willing to walk down the path of denuclearization. But the big question here, and everyone asking, is what is the time frame? I mean, the U.S. is going to say that we want immediate response to this, and that it has to be, transparent and all of these things. And I don't think that North Korea is willing to do that, because if they do, they lose all of their leverage. So I think they're going to be saying something initially, something like 20 years, and if everything goes well and you help us rebuild our economy, we'll denuclearize. But I don't think they expect to get 20. I don't even know if it's acceptable to the U.S. to be beyond more than 6 months.
Mr. Lee, obviously there is still lack of clarity about the terms both sides will bring to the table.
That's right. We talk about the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. That formulation made its official debut in the joint statement of September 19, 2005. In the six-party talks framework. That formulation, that phrase is mentioned in every single UN Security Council resolution as of 2006. But what does that mean? We know that there are no nukes in the South. So why say denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula instead of North Korea? Well, because North Korea insists. And in North Korean parlance, that phrase means exactly dislodging the United States' U.S. extended nuclear deterrence from the region, including South Korea and Japan. We have to notice that, we have to take note that Kim Jong-un has made no concessions whatsoever yet. The mere utterance of abstinence from forbidden activities, these activities like missile launches and nuclear tests are prohibited under more than 10 UN Security Council resolutions. So just merely saying he won't do that in the meantime is no concession at all. Yet there is this illusion that Kim has changed course for the better.
If both sides are making no substantial promises, why there is so much of expectations of this kind of a meeting and possibly a peace deal between the two sides?
Because peace is what we want, jaw is better than war, and this continual bluster barrage that we've seen coming out of North Korea makes many people nervous, especially South Korea. Eminently understandably, South Korea has grown rich, doesn't have the stomach to escalate with North Korea, has far too much to lose, much more than North Korea does in a crisis or war situation. So no one wants to go there. And I think the North Korean regime is very crafty. It is a dictatorship in perpetuity. As long as Kim is able to hold his own mortality at bay, he will rule for the next half-century, presumably. So he has time. He shows little regard for human life, the lives of his own people, and that means he can afford to play this game more credibly than his counterpart.
But Einar, it seems it is Kim Jong-un has made the promise that he will probably accept that the U.S. Still have some troops stationed on the Korean Peninsula, and that doesn't necessarily mean the canceling of the war game at this time. He is the one that sounds conciliatory. Einar?
Absolutely, and this is part of the PR game. I mean, I think he's calculated very well. I mean, you have him offering these concessions, at least, you know, verbally, and then you have what? You have the U.S. and South Korea entering into their war games. Yes, they've downscaled it and things like that, but there are a number of factors in there which he can point to. So he's trying to win the PR game here. I don't know that there's going to be a successful resolution to this. You have really two of the most unpredictable people in the world leaders, you know, who are going to be meeting, and no one knows how this is going to go. I mean, Donald Trump has already said that he's willing to walk out if he doesn't get what he wants. I don't know what he wants because he hasn't made it clear. He hasn't actually said that he wants a complete you know, undoing of their nuclear things. But the other issue here is, and I agree with my colleague about a lot of things, North Korea is a rogue nation. On the other hand, you have this asymmetry. The United States is a very powerful entity with nuclear bombs who has said that they do not like North Korea, they do not like the regime. There might be lots of reasons to do that. But you can't have countries roaming the world deciding what is and is not acceptable to them. This is part of the problem of that's happened. This is why we have the mess in the Middle East. At some point, the world has to speak up and say, look, you pay attention to yourself. Do not throw bricks if you live in a glass house.
Mr. Lee, there are two scenarios. One is that they will have some kind of a historic agreement between U.S. and North Korea. And the other is the U.S. said, we have tried that. It doesn't work. We will bomb them.
I would say there is a third and perhaps even more probable scenario, which is President Trump, like all his predecessors, including officials, journalists, American journalists and academics and so on, who have met Kim the First, the founder, the grandfather, and Kim the Second, and this one, and have all come away impressed that the great leader is not crazy. He's actually quite reasonable and intelligent and knowledgeable. He says pleasing things like, I will not call for the immediate withdrawal of U.S. troops. I understand they play a stabilizing role in the region. This is what Kim Il-sung did to reporters from the New York Times, the Washington Post, and a Harvard professor in 1972, respectively, in May, June, July. This is what Kim Jong-il said to the South Korean president in the aftermath during the first ever Inter-Korean summit in June 2000. Kim Jong-un is saying these things already, and Mr. Trump will come away thinking, wow, I connected with this rocket man solely by the virtue of my own ingenuity and empathy and intelligence, and he will come away with unrealistic expectations. North Korea will not oblige, and in the meantime, the U.S. will probably prematurely relax sanctions against North Korea, which is what Kim wants.
But I'm going to have to disagree with that. The fact is that Trump has dug himself into a hole. He has to feed his red meat base, and they will not accept any kind of return to what other presidents did. Donald Trump came in saying, you know, he's going to be a cowboy. He's willing to fire off rockets while he's having salad with Xi Jinping. This is a guy who really does believe that he has this power and that he can use it, especially if it's against a much smaller entity like that. So I would not discount this idea that a war is coming.
Wow. And Mr. Lee, what do you think President Moon is having on his mind? Because there's a lot of thing on his at stake for him. If he doesn't deliver anything substantial, that will be a bad thing, bad optics at least.
Well, President Moon is most eager to make progress on inter-Korean relations, resume inter-Korean economic and cultural projects, and all those good things create this optics, the optics of reconciliation and peace. And that, in the short term, I guess, is sound politics. It's good business. When President Moon was the chief of staff for the late President Roh Moo-hyun, who was in power from 2003 to 2008. In those heady days, South Korea gave North Korea unquestioned, unconditionally, about $900 million per year, 70% of that in cash. And one might call that self-defeating appeasement. One might call that pragmatic policy, a generous policy of engagement. But the truth is, North Korea took the money and kept developing its nuclear and chemical, biological, radiological, and ICBM capabilities. So I think President Moon is probably repeating the mistakes of the past in overly really bending over backward to accommodate Kim and his sister and whatever Kim Jong-un is doing. Shutting down that outdated nuclear site reminds me of what North Korea did in June 2008 when it blew up an outdated cooling tower attached to its main nuclear reactor. That dramatic gesture was celebrated as a breakthrough, but I think 10 years later it's clear it was not.
Obviously, Mr. Lee, you don't have a lot of faith in North Koreans. And Einar, finally, what do you think of China's role? Will China be left out of the loop?
No, there's no possibility. I mean, nothing happens here without China. China is still the largest trading partner, although they have decreased the amount of trade with North Korea, cut their cash flow by a third just this last year, and it continues. There's been no let-up. On the other hand, it has a border there. If something's going to happen, China is going to be involved. This idea that it can be sidelined is kind of juvenile.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee, and thank you, Einar, for your analysis on this. You've been watching The Point here on CGTN. We'll be right back. Well, Beijing's Auto Show 2018, the industry's biggest sales event this year, starting on April the 25th, was seen as the reshuffling probably of the auto industry by some analysts. The show features 1,200 exhibitors with more than 1,000 cars from 14 different countries. New energy vehicles have become the highlight in some way, which showcases 174 electric vehicles, with 124 of them developed domestically. As the world's biggest vehicle market and taking over #1 spot from the U.S. for EVs in 2015, China has made up its mind to reduce its current 25% duty on foreign vehicles, as announced by Chinese President Xi at the recent Boao Forum. Well, under the circumstances of looming trade war between the two largest economies, how much will the policy change the rules of the game? And after 2 decades policy of 50-50 joint venture with foreign investors, what opportunities and challenges will the new rule bring to global car makers and markets? Joining me here in the studio is Xing Lei, Chief Editor of the China Automotive Review, and also Bill Russo, Feng Advisory Company's Managing Director and CEO of Automobility Limited. Welcome to both of you. So the new policy, which was announced, that China will ease the restrictions of foreign brands into the Chinese market, cutting off tariffs, and also reducing the limits of 50% shareholding of foreign brands. How will that shape China's auto market?
Well, for the foreign automakers, based on my conversation with quite a few senior executives, their response is nothing for now, because there still need to be details. I mean, only a timeline has been given, 2018, 20, 2022, but there still need to be details, and then they have to figure out what they're going to do with their partners.
What is their sentiment? Is it too good to be true, or still too little too late?
I think the overall sentiment is that they like it, they support it, they appreciate it. But again, it's only an overall umbrella that it's going to open up, but you still need the details, exact details of how. And even if it's open up, I don't expect you will see any immediate, wholly owned foreign, enterprises or WOFE, within the next few years, because you have to wait.
Okay. And Bill, what do you think of the timing of this new policy? Why now? Is it because it is caving in to pressure from foreign car makers?
Definitely not. China will not enact a policy change unless it's in the interest of China to do so.
And you believe it is?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, the joint venture requirement is an artifact of more than 20 years old policy, which suited China in the 1990s, and probably through the last 2 decades it's helped to encourage foreign companies to come set up joint ventures, and they're already here. So changing the policy now would basically require restructuring of established entities, which I don't think the foreign companies are interested in doing. If you haven't established and you're about to consider, and in that category it's mainly electric vehicles.
So it won't make much a difference?
No, no.
foreign
For the
brands.
existing JVs that are already established, it would be very difficult to restructure. If you're considering coming to China and bringing a new technology like an electric vehicle, in that case you might be more willing now to invest because you can have a wholly owned facility. But in that case, I think China is very much interested in having foreign EV technologies come to China, and why not take that consideration away from anybody who
Will
might
that be the
hesitating?
case? Because if, for example, if GM wants to set up an EV factory, is it the time for it to establish plants?
China's already the largest electric vehicle market in the world by far, with 777,000 units sold last year. It will be the largest electric vehicle market in the world for probably ever. So if you're an electric vehicle manufacturer or supplier, coming to China is an essential part of how you scale your technology.
What do you make of the development of electric vehicles here in China? As Bill said, it is a very ambitious plan, probably 2 million EVs by 2020.
Correct.
But some say still it is subsidized and it is not a level playing field for EVs and diesel and petrol cars.
And this is exactly the view of some of the foreign manufacturers. Correct. I mean, the volumes have been driven by, subsidy policies which are being phased out in 2020. And that year is when the target
And car plate policies.
Yeah, exactly, in Beijing. And you will see these foreign manufacturers ramping up local production of NEVs. And their point is, okay, once the subsidies are out, we have the brand power. We will have the right products for the market, and we'll see what the Chinese.
What about technology? Aren't the Chinese brands on the same level with the foreign competitors? For example, Geely and Beijing Automobile, are they?
The perception is,
enough?
with traditional internal combustion engines and transmissions, the Chinese brands are behind. But for EVs, it's sort of like a leap over, or they're at least on a par with the foreign manufacturers. So they got a head start. But we'll see. I mean, the competition is coming. We'll see what happens in a few years.
It's a more level playing field for EV than it is for the traditional combustion or even diesel or conventional hybrid technologies where other markets lead. So China has a chance to be more competitive in EV, which is why the government encourages it. It sees the global competitiveness of the domestic auto industry on being a more level playing field.
But some people say, especially those foreign brands, say this is not a level playing field. There are many policies that are in favor of domestic brands in different ways. Do you think the domestic EV makers should be concerned if this is going to be more competition in this field?
Well, more competition is good.
It's definitely got to come, right?
If you have a policy advantage and competitors are prevented from competing, then it doesn't make for good competition among the domestic companies to not have a fast horse in a race. If there's more competition, it's good. When foreign companies come here and bring their suppliers with them, it's also good for the local car makers because they can leverage the same capabilities that those suppliers bring to the market.
And you think so? The local brands will also become better as a result.
I mean, local brands, they're already, they have their own proprietary technology, but they still depend on a lot of the, established foreign, especially suppliers, who are actually developing technologies in China, for China, and possibly for other parts of the world.
Let's talk about autonomous driving vehicles. We've heard a lot of buzz about this. Google has been trying that, Tesla, GM, they all have even some European brands. And China also, Alibaba and Baidu have been trying out their versions. Technology-wise, what do you make of their comparative advantages, and who will finally win? Probably that's a difficult question.
If you're referring to if the Chinese or the foreign,
the Chinese brands.
I mean, in China, it's a special market, and The roads are different, right? The road conditions are different, but you have a lot of these local startups besides even the BATs who's providing unique technology for certain situations, for certain enclosed environments that could happen faster.
But who will have the comprehensive strength that will win out?
Well, we have to look at it, how are we commercializing technology? And what we see in China is that you have a much more connected population of users who are increasingly booking cars on demand. The advent of booking services like Didi, which has 450 million registered users in China, and more than 12% of the car park of China is actually cars that are registered on the Didi platform. That's one ride-hailing service. When you take autonomous driving, the question of autonomous driving and where you're going to deploy it, the main segment of the market where it's going to be deployed is in the mobility services fleets. And when you put a passenger in a car and they're not driving it, it's the digital economy that's trying to serve them with information, data.
So those data information companies probably have more advantages in driving the sector.
Which is why Google, Apple, Baidu, Tencent, and Alibaba are actively investing in
And
autonomous
those traditional automakers will be left behind, you think?
I think traditional automakers don't know how to commercialize day-to-day transactional relationships with the users in those cars. The internet companies do, and that's why they're investing in these technologies. They want to free us up from being pilots to being users inside of a moving living space.
And will this autonomous driving change the picture, the landscape of automobile industry, finally?
Well, it's a matter of
when?
It's a matter of buying a vehicle versus using a vehicle, right? Which is
nobody own a vehicle.
Nobody owning a vehicle,
and then it's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to be happening in a black and white way.
What is the time frame?
It's going to be a transitional period over maybe the next 10 to 15 years.
10 to 15 years.
Some companies are announcing they're coming out with level 3 autonomous driving next year around 2020, and then level 4 before 2025.
Is that over ambitious?
The technology will probably be ready before the market and the infrastructure is ready to handle it.
We have to end on that very ambitious note. Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you. You've been watching The Point here on CGTN. I'm Jae-in in Beijing. Goodbye for now.